Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Johanne Whitmore. I'm Senior Researcher at the Chair in Energy Sector Management at HEC Montréal. So welcome to our workshop on decarbonizing long-haul trucking in Eastern Canada. It's to do a comparison of technologies on the Autoroute 20 and the Highway 40 between Quebec City and Windsor. So I'm just going to present quickly the objective of our workshop and as well the conference and a little bit of the logistics for the roundtables afterwards. Okay, so oops, sorry about that. So the mandate, the reason that we're doing this is actually we've been mandated by the government of Quebec to do a study to do this comparison. And basically, the Chair in Energy Sector Management at HEC Montréal is a chair that specifically works on looking on the different opportunities to best reach our transition goals. And in this case, we're looking specifically at transportation, but we do as much looking at grids as or buildings or any other sectors that need to have a balance between energy and services and environmental outcome. So we're working with CPCS to carry out, as well in collaboration with the government of Quebec, a techno-economic comparison of Class A technologies to decarbonize long haul with the focus, like I said, on the Quebec City-Windsor corridor. And the four technologies we're going to be looking at are battery electric trucks, hydrogen fuel cell trucks, renewable natural gas trucks, and electric road system with overhead conductive transmission, otherwise known as catenary trucks. So the workshop objective is to explore and validate transparently with experts from the industry, government, and academia the larger decarbonizing context and key parameters that we're going to be looking at in our analysis. It's a way to make sure we can validate what we're doing and do it collaboratively. So the research team is composed of myself with my colleague Pierre-Olivier Pineau, who is professor and holder of the chair. He's also going to be presenting. For the CPCS group, which is the consultant leading the modeling work, there's Mathieu Cyr, who's the associate vice president, and Nick Roberts, who is a senior consultant for CPCS and will be presenting after me. And for the government of Quebec, we have Guillaume Paré, which is an advisor of strategic mobility at the Ministry of Environment of Quebec, but we also have an interministerial committee from ministries of transport, finance, economy, and other people from the Ministry of Environment that are also supporting this work. The workshop itself is a 3-day event, if we want. It has 50 stakeholders that we've chosen to participate. So it's not at large, like we really specifically selected people based on their background and made sure that there would be a diversity from different level of decision making at the academia, at the university, government, professional, and industry sectors. And we have people coming from Quebec, Ontario, federal, US, and EU. So it's really, we want to bring people's brain together to think of this issue collectively, because it's very complex and some areas are much more advanced, and we want to make sure we can benefit from everyone's expertise. So the scoping conference that we're doing today is basically to sort of prepare the participants for the 4 roundtables that are going to take place tomorrow and the day after. The 4 roundtables are basically going to cover 6 questions, and they're all identical. It's just we wanted to have smaller groups of between 12 to 15 people to have better discussions. Out of that, I'm going to prepare a workshop synthesis report, and that report is going to support the simulation that we're going to be doing. And the simulations, like I said, is going to be done by CPCS over the next few months. And once we have some results, it's going to be, we'll have a review process, hopefully perhaps with some of the experts that participated in the workshop, and then present a final publication later in fall or winter. Why are we doing this? Well, basically it's that the initiatives to decarbonize long-haul freight are limited, at least in Eastern Canada. The sector lacks a lot of transparency, collaboration, and independent study. There's often incoherence between and within government on policies and analysis, and it's a Class 8 long-haul trucks is often politicized and has a lot of special interests or industry-led. So we wanted to be able to bring everybody, both from different sectors, to sort of start bringing this at a more level playing field, as opposed to who has the most influence or access to government. We even have, our study is going to be very open. We're doing it with the Ministry of Environment, but the Ministry of Economy is doing an independent study that's with a more industry-led for hydrogen, and we're not implicated with that, but hopefully this can be useful. Not sure if their data is going to be public or not, but ours is going to be public. So there's few studies that have assessed the feasibility associated with the potential of decarbonization in prominent corridors. So this is why we're in Canada specifically, and all the way to the US. So we wanted to look at specifically in the context of Quebec, and because long haul doesn't stop at our borders, that's why we're looking also into Ontario and hopefully eventually US with other work. It also will help provide, hopefully, transparent data and assumptions on the technologies to allow others to use that data and update further models and studies and collaboration. So we hope it's like kind of a starting point. It won't be perfect. It might not even be very detailed compared to other study being done in Europe or in the US, but it's a starting point, and I think we have to see it that way. And the results that we will be generating hopefully can be used by a more systemic approach for decarbonizing long-haul freight to assess the impact of different technologies and see the crossover with intermodality choices of with maritime and also rail, and also look at the impact of grid, of the different choices on the grid if we're electrifying, especially and the energy demand. So there's other work being done on that. The University of Windsor, we have actually somebody that's going to speak to us about that. And there's also an initiative in Canada called the Energy Modeling Hub. So hopefully this can be part, which is aiming to have more open, transparent models from across Canada and elsewhere. So hopefully our work can feed into that. So this is the scoping conference. Quickly, we're doing the intro right now. Nicholas is going to be speaking afterwards. We'll have the first part, which is providing a sort of overview of the long-haul freight transportation, more kind of data and what the governments, federal government of Canada and then Ontario and Quebec are doing. We'll have a short break. And then the second part is more looking at the technology. So the 4 technologies that we're looking, what are some considerations and specificities that we should be considering when we're going to be doing our simulations. And afterwards, we're going to have the last part, which is more international perspective with colleagues from the US and from Europe as well, and others that are working on the cross-borders issue. So all the biographies of the speakers are available in the PDF, which is online, which I've already sent you. So I won't go into depth when I present each speakers. So please do read the bios so you can know them a bit better. So as I said, the first part is going to be Pierre-Olivier Pineau. He's my colleague at the chair, and he's also going to be leading this work we're doing. Then it's going to be Mike Roeth, which is Executive Director of the North American Council for Freight Efficiency and Trucking lead at the Rocky Mountain Institute. For the government perspective, we have Jordan Wolfe, which is Deputy Director of the Zero Emission Trucking Program for Transport Canada. Alain Lemieux, who is an economist and senior advisor at the Ministry of Transport for the government of Quebec. And finally, we'll have Carolyn Kim to give us she's senior director of the Community and Decarbonizing Group of Pembina Institute. We invited somebody from the government of Ontario to join us, but they preferred to just participate in the roundtables and not present at this time, which is fine. So Pineau is our expert for the different technologies. So we're going to have Rice Smith, who is our owner and partner of Change Energy Services, to look at the hydrogen fuel cell trucks. For the new renewable natural gas trucks, we have Francisco Doyon, who is advisor of development of natural gas for vehicles at Energia, which is the distributor of natural gas in Quebec. For overhead conductive or catenary trucks, we'll have David Saban, who is professor of mechanical engineer and the director of the Center for Sustainable Road Freight at the University of Cambridge. And lastly, we'll have Sal Crudel, who is Technological Application Group Manager at the Innovative Vehicle Institute that focuses on electrification of vehicles and does research and helps fleets to electrify. And that's based in Quebec, and he'll be looking at the battery electric trucks. For the last part, we have Matteo Craglia, who is a transport analyst and modeler at the International Transportation Forum. And he did a whole modeling work on how to minimize costs based on different electrification options for heavy trucks. For having a little bit more sort of broader perspective on logistic, intermodality, and efficiency and their importance for decarbonizing long haul, we're going to have Maya Petzik. I hope I pronounced her name well. She's professor of logistics at the University of Westminster. And then Georgia Vanni, who is a seasonal instructor at the Department of Civil Environmental Engineer, and she's also a research associate at the Cross-Border Institute at the University of Windsor, who will look at what they're doing, because they're actually doing a similar work to us, but from a different angle, and they're going all the way to Chicago. So they're going to, and she'll speak about some of the challenges between, the cross-border challenges between US and Canada and its impact on the grid depending on the choice. And finally, we'll have Dr. Archer Yip, who's a researcher at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and he'll give us an update on some of the important work that they're doing, and hopefully some of the crossover that we can have between US and Canada. So just for logistic quickly for tomorrow, just make sure that you've read the backgrounder. There's 6 questions. They're in the PDF program that is available at the link below. And you should have already all received a MS Team link to join for the different tables. So if you haven't had that, you can write me an email, and I'll try to fix if for some reason you don't see it. And for questions period, for the conference, there will be about maybe 10, hopefully, depending if we don't go too overboard, we'll try to have a little bit of question period. You can click on the Q&A button and send in your questions by writing, and I will take them and address them to the appropriate speaker. So on that, I will let my colleague Nick Roberts present us on the CPCS modeling approach of our work. So Nick, if you can come in.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Johanne, and good morning, everyone. So I'll give a quick run through of CPCS, our team that we've partnered with HEC Montreal, and talk through our modeling approach. So you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh.
So you might be, if you haven't heard of CPCS before, we're a management consulting firm. We're specialized in the transportation and energy sectors. CPCS actually has a long history working in the transportation sector. The C, the P, C, and the S actually stands for the Canadian Pacific Consulting Services. So it goes way back to the Class 1 railway, back when they had a consulting arm. And we do a lot of projects related to both passenger and freight transportation. On the project team, there's myself. I have a background in mechanical engineering and a finance degree. I've worked across Canada on a variety of fleet decarbonization projects, largely focused in the earlier part of my career on public transit. So working with a lot of transit agencies from coast to coast on battery electric, hydrogen, hybrid, natural gas technologies. And I'm joined with Matthew Cyr, who is CPCS's Associate Vice President for Quebec. Matthew is the project director on this assignment. He has a great long history of working on a lot of socioeconomic projects, understanding government and public policies in a variety of countries, largely focused in Canada and the US, and also a lot of mandates over in Africa as well. So the next slide kind of highlights a lot of the importance of why we're studying truck traffic and decarbonization opportunities on this particular corridor. So there's a lot of things. I think argument can be made that it's one of Canada's most important long-haul trucking corridors for a variety of reasons, including just the adjacency to a lot of the large population centers in the country in Quebec and Ontario, the border crossing that are facilitated with the United States, with the Windsor-Detroit being one of the most busiest border crossings in North America. There's also a lot of freight activity generated by the port in Montreal and also smaller ports along the Great Lakes. And then you'll see here some statistics on like the marine ports, but then also the airports as well. There's a lot of air cargo hubs around the Greater Toronto area and Montreal with the Trudeau and Mirabel international airports. And of course, those all feed in freight traffic into the supply chain, where on the ground side, you have all air cargo connecting with trucking fleets as well. So for a variety of reasons, this is a very important trucking corridor for both provinces as well to collaborate on and see of which opportunities exist. And like Johanne said, we go in with a holistic perspective of looking at all these technologies to see which seem like the most promising cases for decarb. So our project scope is we're leading the modeling efforts, kind of the cost benefit assessment, which I'll get into more on the other slide. But here's a quick overview of our timeline. So we started off with a literature review, collaborating with the research team at HEC Montreal, digging through a lot of academic studies and pulling out key pieces of information. Now we're into that stage of pairing the academic lens with validation with a lot of key industry experts. So that's going to set us up well for getting a good set of modeling parameters for doing the simulation work. And then in through May into August, we're going to be running those scenarios of assessing like what does it look like cost-wise and how fast could the adoption ramp up, and quickly can you tail the GHG emissions for those different technologies operating on the corridor. So go to the next slide. I know there's a lot of information on this one, but I'll explain the key takeaways. There's a bit of a process flow outlining our approach to doing the modeling work. As Johanne mentioned before, so we're going to model a baseline case of diesel trucks running on the corridor. So if nothing changes, and then compare our 4 net zero technologies against that one, which is renewable natural gas, the battery electric, battery with the overhead catenary wires, and then hydrogen fuel cell trucks as well. So step 2 is the one that we've made a lot of good progress with. So getting a lot of those technical and economic parameters in. There's a bunch of them listed in there, but largely it's vehicle specs, vehicle performance, and costs, both on the capital side and the maintenance side as well. Understanding the life cycle of the vehicles and the technological maturity, so we can see when they could potentially be starting to phase in for various operators running along that corridor. Then likewise for the infrastructure as well. So we want to understand infrastructure costs for charging stations, refueling stations for hydrogen and natural gas, some of the performance specs of those, so we can adequately come up with an estimate of sizing the infrastructure to match the demands, energy demands of the fleet at that time. And then we have socioeconomic parameters as well, which is basically like looking at the prices of electricity, fuel, and of course the cost of carbon, which is ramping up according to the federal pricing schedule. And then step 3 there is the validation of all of those key modeling parameters with members of industry, OEMs, government, academia. And then we're going to pair that with kind of the freight traffic volume, so understanding the number of long haul trucks and their average kilometers accumulated per year, and you use that to build up the demand and that transition pathway for the fleet. And then the last step, step 5 there, is the cost benefit. So really understanding the total life cycle cost for the vehicles and infrastructure, the various components of that. And I should say we want to understand the true cost. So we're going to be modeling a scenario without any subsidies in that to understand the real cost of running these assets, and then doing a sensitivity analysis, because I think it's well understood that there's a lot of still development to go with these various technologies. So to kind of capture some of the uncertainty for that, we're going to adjust some key parameters plus or minus tolerance and see how that impacts the results of this. There are some out of scope parameters which are listed down there in the bottom. I know a lot of ones that come to mind is like end of life cycle considerations for battery packs and things like that. I think some of these we're not going to be modeling, but we can give mention to in the study itself and talk about some trends that we've been seeing with, like, say, life cycle partnering with some of the electric bus companies on repurposing and recycling some of the lithium batteries and other things like that. Also, too, I would say our infrastructure cutoff is at the fueling and recharging station. Our project scope doesn't get into any of the upstream, so to say, power generation, transmission, and distribution upgrades. So I think I'll hopefully stayed within the time limit, and I'll pass it back to Johanne. And of course, I'm sure we'll get into a lot of conversation on this throughout the next couple of days.
Okay, thanks, Nicholas. It's Pierre-Olivier, it would be you to take the...
Yes, so I'll share my screen. So I'll present on the state of long-haul freight transportation in Ontario and Quebec. I'll provide some general figures to give, provide a perspective on why freight transportation is important. As you all know, the data is not always available just to characterize long-haul freight transportation. So I'll be talking about freight transportation and then provide as much detail as the available data allows me to. And I'll do so for Ontario and Quebec. And then just to provide a general picture in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, because of course, if we're looking at that is in a decarbonization context, it's because greenhouse gases are an issue. And here for Ontario, you can see how much emissions have grown since 1990 until 2019, and I chose 2019 because that's pre-pandemic numbers, and with COVID, numbers went down, but most likely artificially, and went up, especially in the freight for freight transportation. They went up back to the pre-COVID level. But so here you see, as you can see, there are different sectors. Some sectors have grown. Passenger transportation, buildings in Ontario, both residential and services buildings, and heavy duty truck and rail for freight has grown quite a lot. Not as much as the building service sector, but still by 60%. And some sectors have seen their emissions going down, which is what we were hoping for whole sectors, but only happened in some sectors on the left of the screen. And in this graphs, you can see, the higher the bubble is, the larger the share of provincial emissions are. So the bubble for freight transportation, as you can see, especially heavy truck and rail, but rail is a tiny portion of these emissions. It's really heavy duty trucks that are dominating these emissions, are growing fastly, 60%. I did this graph with the most recent data from Environment Canada, meaning the recent inventory that was just released early April. And funnily, in this data, if you were not aware, freight transportation data, emissions data have gone down by 4.5 tons for just the the sector, heavy duty trucks and rail. So and then so for 2019. Last year data, the emissions were 4 tons above the 13.3 tons million tons you see on the screen. So for some reason that I didn't have time to investigate, freight transportation emissions have gone down without, of course, for the same year, but just different years for inventory. We'll have to investigate what explains that. But in any case, with the most recent data, we have a 60% increase in Ontario for freight transportation for trucks, mostly trucks. And this is, of course, very concerning, as again, we need to decarbonize. And it's growing, and so we have to look at options. In Quebec, the situation is similar, also a growth of about 68%. It is, with other transportation, the largest growing sector in emissions in Quebec. So not only are we not reducing in heavy-duty trucks, but it's growing, more quickly than any other sector. So these are concerning trends. The thing that we should know overall is that it doesn't have to be so. If we compare Canada to the rest of the world, things are not moving in the same way everywhere. So here we compare OECD countries, and Canada is being part of the OECD. You can see that in transportation, in general, not only freight trucks, but transport in general, Canada is among the countries where we have one of the highest growth in the transportation sector, 51% over the period 1990 to 2019. So some countries are worse than us, but many countries are actually better. And if we look at the European Union, transportation emissions have grown only by 20% over that period. In Canada, 51%. And you can see some countries like Germany where they actually didn't grow, and some countries like Finland where they actually went down, Finland, Sweden. So thinking that transportation emissions have to go up is actually wrong. They can go down, and they have been going down in some countries. And especially if we look at freight transportation, freight trucks, Canada, again, with some data that probably have been revised now. So when the government of Canada will send the new data to the OECD, then there will be some adjustment here. But even with adjustment, we are increasing our emissions in freight trucks more than other countries. So so even though these data may be inaccurate because the government has changed the data, 200% of increase, it's a lot. And you can see some countries have done much better in terms of sorry for that, in terms of managing freight trucks emissions. So there's clearly something that we are not doing correctly in Canada, because in some other places it's not going as badly as here. Even the US, which we like to be compared to, doesn't see its emissions from the truck and transportation sector growing as fast as in Canada. So clearly, the good news is that there's lots of room for improvement. If we look more in more details in how different types of freight transportation have increased in terms now in ton kilometers for the different sectors, heavy trucks or in Ontario have been growing more quickly than most other, the largest other ones, which is railway, only a 12% increase in rail, 24% in heavy trucks, which heavy trucks increase in terms of ton kilometers is about the same as the population that you can see in the left upper corner, plus 25% of population increase in Ontario, and that's over the 2019 period, because Natural Resources Canada doesn't provide data before 2000, so I had to change again the length of the period. But still, it gives you an idea that we're not slowing down in terms of increase in ton kilometers. We are just following population. But if we look at maritime transportation in Ontario, it has increased, which is a good news, because of course it's much less energy intensive and emission intensive when you do railway or maritime transportation. And for the lower duty trucks, light duty, medium trucks, you can see extremely high increases in terms of ton kilometers, which of course can be explained in many different ways. We love to be delivered home stuff, so we can probably relate these increases to our love to get Amazon products every day delivered to our door. But in terms of emissions, it's not as problematic, and in terms of solution, as most of you know, it will be much easier to decarbonize these light trucks and medium trucks because they are not long haul trucks, and battery technologies are much more adequate for these. If we look at the same figures for Quebec, they actually are look worse because heavy trucks have increased by more than in Ontario, with a population increase lower than in Ontario, only 16% increase in population, 34% increase in ton kilometers in Quebec. So heavy trucks have been growing much more, while maritime and railway transportation have been going down. So which of course really concerning trends in terms of the efficiency of the transportation system. And medium and light trucks have been growing also quite a lot, similar figures as in Ontario. And so we might be wondering, how can heavy trucks grow by 34%, but emissions grow by 60%? As I first showed you, the key reason for that is that the load factor of trucks across Canada is going down. So basically that means that trucks are emptier and emptier, so there's less and less ton per truck in Canada. So over the 2000-2020 period, the load factor of trucks has been decreasing by 20%. So when in 2000, one truck on average were carrying 3 tons of material, now it's only 2.5 ton. Whereas in Germany, which is a country that actually improved its record on a heavy truck and is probably managing much better its freight transportation, they're optimizing their loads. And while in 2000, a truck on average carried 4.5 tons of material, it now carry almost 6 or 5.5, slightly more than 5.5 ton. So you can see different trends. We're getting worse and worse across Canada, not doing what we could in terms of logistics. And in Germany, they're doing better. So that explains, at least in part, why emissions are growing at a faster rate than our actual ton kilometers transported in terms of heavy duty trucks. And this is, of course, could be explained by a variety of factors, but it's definitely not the size of Canada or the fact that we're a cold country, which are two arguments very often mentioned to explain why Canada is using more energy. It's because we're a large country and we are a cold country, but that has, of course, nothing to do with the fact that we're getting worse over the years. And then so we should basically look at what we're doing and what we're not doing to improve. A last slide, just to remind ourselves that trucks are extremely useful, but are also much less efficient than trains and boats to carry freight. Just if we look at Canadian data, we are using 2.6 megajoule per ton kilometer by truck. And if we were shifting toward trains or boat, we could do savings like 80%, 75% decrease for the same ton kilometers. So these are just like huge decreases in terms of energy consumption and, of course, emissions. And if we were, when we're looking at the rise of and the increase in freight truck transportation and not the same type of increase in train and boat, then that could leave us wondering, why are we not choosing the most efficient and the more the less consuming transportation modes? And again, this is food for thought for the whole conference. Thank you. I think I stayed in time. And
we're running a little bit overboard, but it's okay. We'll just have to perhaps cut on the question. But Mike, it's your time. Merci beaucoup, Pierre-Olivier. That was really super interesting. Mike, are you able to share your screen, Mike?
Yes, working on it right now.
Okay, wonderful.
Hello, everybody.
Please, if you can expand the full screen, your presentation, it will be, we'll see all the details. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. So hello, everyone. My name is Mike Roeth. I lead the North American Council for Freight Efficiency, and I'm really excited to help kick off this session on long haul trucking. It's consumes me and our work. And we do work in light trucks and medium trucks, but as mentioned before, long haul trucking is really where we need to put our emphasis and to have the impact that we want to have. So NACFE.org, runonless.com, two places where you can get a lot of information. Everything I share here is on those sites. And NACFE does this work in coordination with RMI, but really an organization that feels like we're really grounded in North American freight movement and this transformation, if you will, to decarbonizing. And so our fleets that we work with are really aggressively working on decarbonizing. Now, it's not across the entire network, but we definitely feel like we are in this moment of decarbonizing. And as we view it, it's driven by a lot of things, including regulations and fuel prices, but the movement towards sustainability has even surprised me in our work. So it is here, it's happening. Pockets are teaching the rest of the organization. We've got a classic sort of S curve of innovators and early adopters, but they're doing this in three ways. Burning less diesel through efficiency, quite important in the short term to have less carbon in our atmosphere. Secondly, and we intentionally have this order, and I'll close with this in a few minutes, but is going to zero. So focusing what this conference is of getting to zero emissions on the vehicle and having a good well-to-wheels approach. And then finally, considering some alternatives in what we call the messy middle. So a couple of ways NACFE really does this work in order to be able to learn is through our Run on Less series. And tomorrow we will announce a big announcement on the fleets participating in the one clear to the right there on Run on Less Electric Depot, where we'll focus on eight depots across North America who are scaling electric trucks right now, and learn a lot from them as to how they can do that. So a long history over the last 7-8 years of delivering these runs. If you have a chance, look at runonless.com. So around data, I was thinking about what data could I bring to this discussion that would help in this workshop. And I chose this, and that is the split in Class 8 truck sales in North America. So North America here, this is US and Canada from ACT Research. And if you look at it, I think 11 years we looked at here. Actually, it's 2010 to 2021. Apologize, I got an error on this slide. I'll fix that, Johanne. But this is a 11-year look at the split between Class 8 production of the four major categories, and really just three. And that is tractors, over-the-road tractors, both sleeper and day cabs, and finally vocational trucks, with a small amount being trucks and sleepers. And so what you see here is, sleepers, the 45% on that 11-year average, is predominantly long haul. The 29% in day cabs often is called urban or short haul or whatever. And my conclusion, or our conclusion here over a lot of work, is that we're seeing a movement to regional haul. And we call that, we describe that as returning to base every day or two, usually with day cabs. So that 29% is really in, a category that we call long regional haul. One point of note under day cabs, the sales of day cabs in the United States is significantly higher at 30% of the Class 8 total, rather than Canada at only 19%. So I think it has to do with some of the nature, but also maybe this emerging place of long regional haul. And this has been an area we've been thinking about and working on for well over 5 years around this. And so we do see a movement here to more regional haul. I think there's a great deal of things going on that support this, one of which is getting the driver home. And so if we get drivers home every day or every other day, maybe with a hotel stay, then that's a more attractive job for a lot of the potential truck drivers in an area that's really hugely challenging. It also supports some of these alternatives, because if we can get these, as these trucks are coming back to base, they are more open to fueling or charging at that home base. We also have, in the United States and Canada, a focus on drop and hook of trailers. So the idea here is that Pony Expressing and hub and spoke that's being driven maybe by e-commerce and a lot of other factors, is growing. And that's a good thing for a lot of reasons. And so I point to this graphic off to the left here, where what I'm really talking about is this ABA dedicated fast turn down in the lower left, where this freight can be maybe pony expressed. And one area in this sort of long regional haul, so our terminology is long haul. Oftentimes we call that disparate route, long haul disparate route. So, you know, whether they might be in different places a lot and so forth, that's that sleeper tractor traditional kind of movement. Here we're talking about long regional haul as a more dedicated piece. And so I bring up the Tesla Semi mainly because, you know, that is the focused market for this. And what we are seeing is, you know, a battery electric truck that's maximized for this long regional haul, where, you know, around, you know, a 500-mile run that they announced. We'll see more data, I'm sure, as they start to progress. But the question here for this and the 4 different studies, 4 different technologies that are being studied is basically how can you maximize and efficiently maximize the use of a battery electric truck vis-a-vis the catenary, the RNG, and hydrogen fuel cell. So that brings me to this. You know, we've got a lot of options that are being presented to us as an industry around zero emission and decarbonizing. So we have you know, folks using the engines with advanced diesels, natural gas, in particular renewable natural gas, actually burning hydrogen in an engine. We also have battery electric vehicles, and we've got hydrogen fuel cell. All of these are progressing, you know, well, I think. I mean, we all want them quicker, but we're seeing real progress in these different technologies. Which brings me to this sort of this cage match, if you will, you know, of will it be battery electric trucks or will it be hydrogen fuel cell trucks that kind of win here? And we point to, well, we've done a couple of reports, just published a really good one, I think, on hydrogen trucks, long haul's future ? And off to the right is sort of the big point of our conclusions amongst many, but is that for payload and range, battery electric trucks are going to win as they are smaller. They're just a very simple, highly efficient. Yes, the batteries get heavy. Yes, getting power to each of these depots is challenging, but the simplicity of the truck make it very practical. And then as you get out into long distances, heavier loads, maybe in cases where you cannot get a charge during the run or through catenary, you know, in the shorter term, we see CNG, RNG, renewable diesel, possibly hydrogen in an engine, but ultimately those hydrogen fuel cells winning out in that longer range, heavier needs. And I'm going to close with how we think about the future unfolding around zero emission freight movement, particularly in heavy duty. And that is that today, you know, it's predominantly diesels with some natural gas. Long term, and you can call it 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever. But long term, we believe, given all the work that we've done, including Run on Less, that battery electric trucks and fuel cell trucks from clean energy will be the future. And in the middle here is what we've coined the messy middle. Completed and updated a report just recently on this, but all of these technologies that will come and possibly sunset, some longer than others, to help us decarbonize now. And finally, and I would love to spend a lot of time on this, and I got a minute, is our framework for decision making that we've created here. And so really think about this in terms of thirds when fleets are thinking about what their choices are over the next few decades. And that is, first, look at battery electric and fuel cell. If you can justify through a financial benefit, sustainability, and availability, one of those solutions, go there now. It's important to get, this is the future, and so the quicker you get there. In the middle are a lot of options around natural gas, hydrogen in an engine, renewables, hybrids, a bunch of other things that we collect in this messy middle. And then finally, do nothing is not an option right now as we talk to fleets. And that is, if none of that is, you know, makes sense for you as you look at this over the next decade or more, work on diesel, but improve that diesel, make the fuel efficiency better, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll close with that. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to continued thoughts and actions during this workshop.
Oh, thank you so much, Mike. That was great. Our next speaker is Jordan. Jordan, I don't know if you're able, Jordan Wolfe.
Hello, everybody.
Ministry of Transport. Are you able to share your screen, or do you have a PowerPoint?
I'm working on it right now. How's that look? Can you see it?
Yeah, if you can make it a full screen, perfect. So the floor is yours.
Good, thank you so much. Really excited to be here today, actually, guys. Super interesting project that you guys are working on. Some really good presentations already. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results of what you guys come up with over the course of the week. So I'll dive in because I've only got 10 minutes. And I won't spend too much time on this slide because I know it's been covered by some of the presenters already. And the secret's out that there's now some very recently updated GHG emissions data. And so this is referencing the data previous to the update, but it's still, the main point is still there. So nobody on this call is going to be surprised to learn that, on-road freight haul is important to Canada's economy. It's fundamental. I didn't realize how fundamental it was until I really started looking at the statistics. And you can see here, we're talking about 90% of all goods movements and 95% of all mineral shipments are moved by truck between Canada and the US. So, it's absolutely fundamental. It has an oversized contribution to the economy. Unfortunately, what freight haul has as well is an oversized contribution to GHG emissions. So, contributing roughly a quarter of all of Canada's GHG emissions. That's transportation writ large. And then when you look at heavy transport, it's roughly a third of that, and that's the yellow section on the donut graph there. So, if Canada is going to achieve its emissions reductions targets as it moves towards net zero emissions by 2050, we need to do a little bit better in the medium and heavy duty segment. So, one thing the government has done, and I'm speaking for Government of Canada here, is set sales mandates. So you can see in the table here some targets of 20, 60, and 100% running out to 2035. This is for the light duty vehicle segment. But in the 2022 emissions reduction plan that was announced roughly about a year ago, there was some mention of similar sales mandates in the medium and heavy duty vehicle segment as well. So 100% by 2040, with the caveat that there will be potentially some sort of boutique applications where that might not apply to. And there was some interim sort of softer targets of 35% mentioned for 2030. So, those seem to be the goalposts that we are striving towards. When you look around, it's pretty easy to see that there's increasing penetration of zero emissions vehicles in the light duty segment. You see them all around. Things are slightly more delayed in the medium and heavy duty segment, and that's for a variety of reasons, a variety of legitimate reasons, if you ask me. One is the higher purchase price of MHZEVs. So that's an acronym I'm going to use for the rest of the presentation. That's medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicles. So they have higher purchase prices, and some of them upwards of $800,000. So that's significant. There's a question of vehicle availability. They're not always available for purchase for those that are interested. Similarly, there's a question of infrastructure readiness. Are there places where you can charge or refuel these vehicles? And right now, the availability is fairly modest. Then there's also, MHZEV applicability in the Canadian context. So when we talk about range, climate implications, weights and dimensions, these are all sort of uniquely, or at least, I would say uniquely Canadian considerations, right? So, much of the freight haul goes north-south, but there is some east-west and there's some long routes in there. Climate has an impact, in particular for battery electric vehicles. And even the fact that cold air is dense air creates more wind resistance requires more energy to propel the truck. So there's some challenges there. And then weights and dimensions. In Canada, we allow larger and heavier trucks on certain routes in comparison with our American counterparts. We usually top out at about 80,000 pounds. We allow overweight vehicles, and many of the MHZEVs that are being brought to market, they're not really built for that sort of niche application. They're built for hauling typical 80,000 pound loads. So there's things like that to consider. We have some intensive duty cycles in the MHZEV sector. And then there's a question of grid readiness. So, you can imagine at a depot or en route charging station where there are several Class 8 vehicles looking to charge simultaneously. And we're not talking about kilowatt chargers. We're talking about megawatts of charging capacity per truck in the not too distant future. The demands on the grid are sizable. But despite all these challenges, we're seeing a lot of movement in a positive direction. So when we look at OEMs, we see a whole host that are bringing models online, from Volvo to Peterbilt to Canada's own Lyon. The IMHZEV program, which I'll speak to shortly, that's the purchase and lease incentive program. They have a list of eligible trims, and there's well over 200 already listed on there. So that's a positive development. We're seeing more and more Canadian deployments being announced. So we know about Aztec in Alberta, BC has plans. There's rotating kind of try before you buy type trials with Hyzon and Nikola. So there's a lot of interest, amongst the different jurisdictions. So that's a good sign as well. And then fleets, we've done a cursory scan to say, what kind of orders are people placing? Like, are they on board? Do they want to adopt these technologies? And, this is probably a vast underestimation, but we know of over 780 orders for heavy duty trucks in Canada that have been placed already. So also very good news. So the gauntlet has been thrown down for governments now. Everybody else is interested. We are interested. We need to make sure that there's an enabling framework to increase readiness for the penetration of these vehicles. So here's where I start to mention some of the Government of Canada initiatives that are in place to do just that. The emissions reduction plan, again, announced about a year ago, had a whole host of measures to address on-road decarbonization, which included a heavy focus on the MHZEV sector. So we saw a top up and continuation to the light duty vehicle purchase and lease incentive program, IZEV. But we also saw the launch of a brand new lease incentive and purchase incentive program called IMHZEV. So this is kind of the sister program to IZEV, but focused on medium and heavy duty vehicles. And so that was funded over $500 million. There's the zero emission trucking program, which is the program that I oversee, and I'll tell you about that on the next slide. Money for truck retrofits. So this is for current rolling stock to improve their efficiency, and even consider things such as repowers. So taking a diesel truck and making it zero emission, give it a second lease on life. There was significant investments in infrastructure. Funding going to both Natural Resources Canada and the Canada Infrastructure Bank to facilitate investments in infrastructure to build out that in the coming years. And then, of course, government looked inward to green its own fleet with some funding to the Treasury Board Secretariat to do just that. More recently, in budget 2023, we saw some additional programming in the form of tax credits for a variety of things that will have a positive influence on accelerating medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicles. So zero emission trucking program, this is the program that I oversee. We're looking to do 5 things primarily. The first is to support provinces and territories to support their readiness to develop and modernize and align guidance, training, standards, codes, regulations, things of that nature with contribution funding. Our first call for proposals just closed, and we're looking to launch a second one very soon. We have an open tender right now to support trucking test beds. So this is to put an on-road, to get a Class 8 vehicle into commercial freight haul, to collect data, to answer some research questions that we have, but primarily to bring all the provinces and territories that are interested in kind of having a front row seat to this, have them tag along to make sure that we can, make a lot of hay from our findings and the discoveries along the way. And so everybody can benefit from those deployments. We plan to do 2 of those over the coming years. We're doing some directed studies and research with a focus on safety research. So everything from, improved field of view, right? So these drivetrains give you new options. You look at the Tesla Semi and you can see the driver is situated right smack dab in the middle of the truck. That gives them an improved field, or her, an improved field of view when operating the vehicle. So we want to know a little bit more about some of the improvements there. The impact on braking systems, of regenerative braking systems, noise, right? What kind of sound levels, what kind of noise do these trucks generate at low speeds, and what is the impact on vulnerable road users? So a whole host of research questions that we're looking to unpack. And then we're making some capital investments at the Motor Vehicle Test Center, located close to you all in Blainville, Quebec, primarily to build a commercial vehicle laboratory to conduct research on the biggest and heaviest zero emissions vehicles. On this slide, you'll see a bit of an overview of the sort of web of Government of Canada programming that's relevant to MHZEVs. So everything from some of the infrastructure programming that I mentioned at Natural Resources Canada. They also have awareness initiatives to raise awareness amongst fleets and different stakeholders regarding the capabilities and benefits of MHZEVs. I mentioned some of the work from Environment and Climate Change Canada in terms of sales mandates and upcoming emissions regulations. Infrastructure Canada is doing a lot of work on buses. So they have significant funding to support zero emissions buses. Canadian Infrastructure Bank for infrastructure investments, as I mentioned. Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. So Measurement Canada is operated out of there, and that's significant because we need to have accurate and reliable measurement of both charging and refueling infrastructure. So there's work taking place there. And then they also operate the Strategic Innovation Fund, which is a funding program that supports very large, generally investments that have both an economic and an environmental return on investments. So there's potential large projects coming out of that. And then Transport Canada, as I mentioned, are two incentive programs and the zero emission trucking program. So I was asked to speak very briefly on intergovernmental collaboration. So, what our program's relatively new, but one of the first things that we did was organize a series of 3 workshops that we co-hosted with industry to bring together all the relevant stakeholders that had an interest in zero emissions trucking to, share information with each other, to let everybody know what our priorities were, what we were working on, and primarily to identify action items going forward, to make sure that we're all kind of aligned, to make sure that some of the new programming that we're standing up at the Government of Canada, addresses the needs beyond just the Government of Canada, the needs of some of our stakeholders. So we hosted a series of 3 workshops, as I mentioned, and some of the key takeaways coming out of that are the need for additional awareness and information sharing, right? So some of the programming coming up, Natural Resources Canada speaks directly to that. Development of guidance, codes, standards, and regulations to continue with infrastructure investments. The topic of training and skills came up several times as well. As these new technologies come to market, there's a whole host of people that will interface with them. Everybody from roadside inspectors to tow truck drivers to maintenance and repair technicians, and so all these drivers, all these people that interface with these vehicles need to be able to do so safely. And so there's a need for new curricular development and reskilling amongst some of the different segments of the population. So there's a need to continue doing that. And then, as mentioned by some of the previous speakers, there are some data and knowledge gaps that still exist, and we're looking to address those through on-road deployments to really prove the capabilities of the technology in the Canadian climate. My last slide here, I was also asked to speak a little bit on intergovernmental collaboration from an international standpoint. So, the joint statement from back in 2021 by Minister of Transport and the Secretary of Transportation in the United States set the tone, right? So bilateral cooperation to fight climate change and limit the environmental impacts from our transportation networks. Pretty clear what the work orders are. So in February, actually, of this year, Transport Canada hosted the first meeting of the Canada-US Zero Emissions Vehicle Task Force that was held here in Ottawa. And this was to establish a shared vision to accelerate the decarbonization of the on-road sector. This is the first of many meetings. I think we're going to continue this conversation going forward with even a greater sense of urgency. A number of joint actions were highlighted from the summit. So everything from working to establish binational alternative fuel corridors, supporting the harmonization of ZEV charging standards, collaboration on R&D and sharing of some of the results of R&D and demonstrations, right, to make sure that our research agendas are supporting each other and that we're not duplicating efforts. And then, of course, collaboration to build consumer and user confidence in ZEVs and continued engagement with Indigenous communities along the way. So those are some of the areas that were initially highlighted to work on together, and that's what we intend to do over the coming years. I think that's probably my 10 minutes right there. If there's questions, if anybody wants to reach out, I encourage them to do so. The email address is here. We have some interesting studies that are coming out, in particular, one that was recently produced on the capabilities of battery technologies for the heavy duty sector. So if anybody's interested in that, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Just everyone, if you have questions, there's, like I said, there's the Q&R button. You can click and write it up. And actually, the panelists can go and answer. It's already been the case for 11 questions. So we can answer it if we don't have enough time to take them, like voice them out. So make sure to read that. There might be some useful information for everyone as well. So the next speaker is going to be the perspective for the Quebec government. It's Alain Lemieux, who is a senior advisor at the Ministry of Transport. Alain, you can share your PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay, hello everyone. So thank you, Johanne, for the invitation to give me the opportunity to talk about the Quebec perspective. So I work for the Ministère des Transports du Québec, but I will talk, and I'm responsible to the conception of the program Éco-Camionnage, but I will talk about some other initiative from other ministry too during this presentation. So first of all, if we check the data of the Ministère de l'Environnement from the inventory of the greenhouse gas emission from Quebec, if we check some all sector, we see that the transport, like Pierre-Olivier said before, transport share about a little more than 40% of all the GHG emission in Quebec. And if we check only in the transport sector, we see that the heavy vehicle count for about 30% of all the emission in the transport sector. So if you do the math, heavy vehicle only count for about 13% of all the emission in Quebec. And those emissions have increased by 166% since 1990. So if we do want to reach our goal and reduce the GHG emission, we do have the choice to take care of the heavy vehicle sector. The Quebec main objective in the fight from climate change is first one is to reduce the GHG emission by 37.5% below the 1990 level by 2030. Second one is to reduce the consumption of petroleum product by 40% below the 2013 level, by 2030. And the last one is to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050. To reach that goal, Quebec current government have two main initiatives. The first one is the 2030 plan for a green economy. And the second one is the Quebec Green Hydrogen and Bioenergy Strategy. The first one, the plan for green energy, is implemented by the Ministère de l'Environnement, de la lutte contre les changements climatiques, de la Faune et des Parcs. They have many measures, but they have like 3 or 4 measures specifically in the transport sector. And they have a budget of 331 million plan until 2027 to increase the use of renewable energy and efficiency in the freight transport sector. And the program Éco-Camionnage and Transport Vert program result from this plan. And like I said, I'm in charge of the program Éco-Camionnage. So the main objective of the program Éco-Camionnage is to aim to reduce GHG emission in the road freight transport industry and service vehicle through the implementation of vehicle measure to improve energy efficiency or the use of alternative energy. The main objective is certainly to electrify the fleet in Quebec, and they have a budget of 77.8 million until March 31st, 2024. So the present program would end in the next year, but if we check for all the period, and last one in 2027, we have maybe like 200 million, 46 million only for the program Éco-Camionnage. So the financing is up to $175,000 for battery electric truck, depending on the vehicle class and the battery power. So for example, a class 8 vehicle that have a 350 kilowatt power batteries will receive the maximum amount, and this amount is decreasing if we have a class 5 or class 6 vehicle. And like Jordan said before, the financial support are cumulative with the medium and heavy duty zero emission program. So I think for that type of vehicle, a class 8 vehicle, I think the program, the federal program, can give up to $100,000. So it's going to be cumulative with the financial support in the program Éco-Camionnage. So if we had the two financial support, the incremental cost is almost covered by 100%. The program also provide funding for hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. For now, we do not have we do not have some type of vehicle on our list, but if so, it will be eligible to receive some funding. And we have other energy efficient technology are also eligible to the program, like trailer side skirt or all retrofit technology that can be installed on the tractor or on the semi-trailer. And we work with the federal government to try to harmonize our list of eligible technology, because the Éco-Camionnage was there before the federal program, but now we have two lists, and we try to the more that the two lists will be harmonized to facilitate the demand, the application form for our beneficiary. The other program is the Transport Vert program. So they give financial support for the acquisition of charging stations. So the program Éco-Camionnage give financial support for the vehicle, and the Transport Vert program give financial support for the charging station. They have a budget of $29.4 million until March 31st, 2027, and the financing can go up to $60,000 for a charging station of 50 kilometers or more. The second main initiative from Quebec is the Quebec Green Hydrogen and Bioenergy Strategy. So this one is implemented by the Ministère de l'Économie, de l'Innovation et de l'Énergie. And the main objective is to create the current framework and favorable environment to accelerate the production, distribution, and use of green hydrogen and bioenergy. So they have a call of proposal in the time, and if a project have a good potential, it can have financial support. We have some other government initiative or regulation. The first one is the Clean Fuel Regulation, which aims to reduce greenhouse gas emission from gasoline and diesel fuel through carbon intensity reduction requirements. So those requirements will be more severe. So in 2030, then carbon intensity will be reduced by 15%. Also, we have the Ministère de l'Environnement, de la lutte contre les changements climatiques et de la faune et des parcs that wish to define a zero emission vehicle standard for every vehicle in Quebec over the next month, which will set in place obligation for manufacturer to sell more battery, electric, or plug-in hybrid truck. So federal government also think about that type of regulation, like Jordan said. So it will be a good opportunity for both government to implement that type of measure. And finally, you have the Ministère des Transports et de la Mobilité Durable that work with various partners to facilitate the implementation of logistics solution. In the program Éco-Camionnage, part of the program concerns the improvement of logistics. So we can give some some financial support to a trucking company that will improve their logistics. What's the opportunity and challenge in Quebec? Well, in Quebec, we have renewable electricity at a competitive cost. So we have an edge with the other jurisdiction because in Quebec, the electricity is quite cheaper. So if we want to electrify our fleet, maybe it will cost less for the electricity. But we have a challenge too, and the biggest one, I think, is the low vehicle autonomy and the lack of dedicated charging station infrastructure currently. I think they currently limit the potential for emission reduction in the long haul transportation.
Sorry, I think that Alain got frozen out. Too bad.
Sorry?
Can everyone hear me? Just, I'm not sure if I'm the one frozen out or if it's Alain.
I can hear you and I can hear Alain.
Oh, really? Okay. Sorry about that.
Do you hear me?
Okay, now I can hear you. Thanks.
Okay. So like I said, the low vehicle autonomy and the lack of charging station limit the potential for now, because if you want to do long haul transportation, you need to have charging station at the minimum range. So for now, we do not have that type of infrastructure, not only for the electricity charging station and not on for the hydrogen too. So for now, I think it's limit the potential, and also the incremental cost of those type of vehicle are still very high if you compare to a standard diesel truck. And if you check for the green hydrogen and bioenergy, the challenge is also to close the current gap, price gap, and to improve their competitiveness with fossil fuel. So it's about all the perspective for Quebec. So if you do have any question.
Merci, Alain, thank you. So our last panelist is going to talk about the perspective of Ontario for long haul. So it's Carolyn Kim from the Pembina Institute. Again, if you have questions, you can write them in and the speakers can also answer, and the answers are available to everyone. So feel free to do that as well. You can go, Carolyn, thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak. I'm obviously not presenting on behalf of the Ontario government, but would like to offer our perspectives at the Pembina Institute in terms of the opportunities for decarbonizing long-haul freight. And many of my peer speakers have alluded to many of the opportunities as well as the challenges ahead. But I will run through some of our Ontario-specific context. So for those who are not familiar with the Pembina Institute, we are a charity and a clean energy think tank with offices across Canada, and we work on many different clean energy policy issues, transportation being one of them. And one of the reasons why we work on this issue is specifically around freight decarbonization, is because we know that freight emissions are steadily increasing with population and employment growth, greater demand for goods movement, and it's projected that freight emissions will surpass passenger emissions by 2030. So that's one of the driving reasons why we as an organization continue to work on freight decarbonization. To talk a little bit about the Ontario context, we know the Quebec-Ontario Continental Corridor is an important one. My fellow speakers have already alluded to the importance of trucking to support our Canadian economy. And we heard from my peers that 90% of Canada's freight shipments are hauled by truck, and that includes materials from minerals, fuel oils, crude petroleum, base metals, and forest products. And we saw from the pandemic how important trucking has to play in our economy to ensure that we have our goods on an everyday basis. And that is very much true in the Ontario context. As one of the largest economies in Canada, Ontario is a natural centroid for goods movement activity, and Specifically, Peel region is one of the regions in Canada that has large, significant freight volumes. We know that, and this might be a bit dated in terms of stats, but as we know it, over 200,000 trucks travel in the province in any given day, with a third moving in Peel region. And there is that important relationship between Ontario vis-a-vis Peel region and Quebec, with Quebec being a large trucking partner with the region. So this kind of corridor between Quebec and Ontario through Highway 401 is an important one. And we can see that in terms of the Highway 401 corridor, almost 45% of the province's interprovincial trade exists in this, this route. And we know approximately 3,000 long distance heavy trucks cross the border between Ontario and Quebec using this 400 series highway. This kind of slide here visualizes the origin and destinations of goods between Peel and Quebec. And so while this pulls from MTO's commercial vehicle survey from 2012, and so it's a bit dated, I suspect that the freight volumes have only grown over the years, again, with increased population, employment, demand for goods movement, and urbanization. So as mentioned previously, while trucking is an important mechanism for goods movement, it also has implications to our carbon footprint. In Ontario, we can see here that emissions from freight have significantly increased between 1990 and 2021. And so we can see that in terms of absolute megatons, but also when it comes to per capita. So based on the latest national inventory report, we can see that trucking has an important piece to the GHG emission profile. And just to note here that it's responsible for close to 28% of GHG emissions. At the Pembina Institute, we know that there's a range of options and opportunities to reduce emissions, and that, extends from, fuel saving devices, technologies, practices, to going to zero, as Mike mentioned it in his NACV presentation. And so at the Pembina Institute, we've investigated the cost and impact relationship of these different types of technologies. You can take a look in our reports on our website for more information, but these can range from, training drivers to be more efficient with their driving, increasing the smart way presence in Ontario, using long combination vehicles, and what Mike also mentioned as the messy middle, exploring use of alternative fuels as we get towards more feasible zero emission vehicle technologies for the heaviest of trucks. And so these can range in terms of reducing GHG emissions from single digits to up to 35%. Again, you can take a look at our website for more case study information about these types of options. But I want to focus the rest of my presentation around the transformative decarbonization options around accelerating to zero emission technologies. And in our view, there's four main buckets in which we see policymakers playing a role in accelerating the uptake of zero emission vehicles and kickstarting the market, especially for the heaviest trucking sector. And so that includes the importance of policies and regulation, the role that incentives have to close that that differential cost between conventional diesel trucks and zero emission vehicle technology, the important role of infrastructure deployment and expansion, and the role that needs to be done around building up capacity and training for those who are going to be using these new technologies. In terms of the direction and how well we're doing, we know that there have been several different levels of investments, and they're slowly but surely becoming the right kinds of policies and programs to set us up for success. And just as an example, I've named a few here. They've also been mentioned by my previous colleagues on the line around investments in infrastructure deployment, offering new incentives for medium and heavy duty vehicles. We know that there's also not only public investments, but private investments to support the emerging EV supply chain in Ontario and across Canada. Important policies and strategies also at play, which can be leveraged, include the clean fuel regulation, and this allows charging network operators and site hosts to earn credits, which can then build up the business case for greater zero emission vehicle infrastructure. In Ontario, we can leverage the low carbon hydrogen strategy. We know that Ontario and specifically MTO has created a new Greater Golden Horseshoe transportation plan with visions and strategic directions up until 2051. Utilizing these investments and policies and taking advantage of recent investments, trying to test and pilot these new technologies all make for great kind of action to prime the uptake of zero emission vehicle technologies. When we compare the policy options in Ontario compared to other provinces such as BC and Quebec, there is some gaps in Ontario, and my colleagues have already kind of alluded to them. So I think continuing to fill in those gaps to offer additional incentives. But the story here, I think, is also the need for greater regulation. We know from the emission reduction plan from Canada that we have quite ambitious sales target for the MHDV sector, 35% MHDV sales by 2030 and 100% of sales by 2040. So these are quite ambitious targets, and the only way to get there is to put in place all the different policies and regulations and incentives and infrastructure investments in place. Something that I'll leave you with, food for fodder, is what are the opportunities and what kind of impact can we have by introducing stringent regulations such as a sales mandate or a sales standard in the MHDV space. And so we at Pembina have been investigating and examining the impacts of that at a national scale. And what we can see is when we introduce a beachhead strategy, meaning there is kind of a scaled approach to introducing a sales standard, we can get close to our emission reduction target by 2040. So starting with the most, ready technology for return to base short haul vehicles, and then progressively getting less stringent when you get to the heaviest vehicles. These are some options that should be considered as we discuss them today and tomorrow. So if you wanted to read more about our policy options for sales regulation and other pieces to that, including infrastructure investments, definitely check out our website. We're developing a MHDV strategy for Canada as we speak, and hope to present something in the spring. So thanks so much for the invitation again to speak this morning.